I don't know. All right, good evening. Today we're learning Maseches Kiddushin Daf Ayin Zayin, and we're starting about 10 lines or so from the bottom of Ayin Vav Amud Beis at the two dots that reads, which one are we at? Rabbi Yossi Omer Af Mi Shehaya. So what we were saying over there was people, let's just look back in the Mishnah to get the exact language. Rabbi Yossi had said in our Mishnah, even people who were signed in the Bezdin of Arke Hayishana. So what was that talking about? The Gemara says, my time up, because daike umechasme. First, they are medayik, they look into the people, they make sure that they're valid to be chosein, and once they sign, that's testimony that they are considered ksherim as it relates to getting married. The Gemara continues, Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus, and if you look back in the Mishnah on Ayin Vav Amud Aleph, his line over there was that if you were written into the Istratya Shamelach, if you were written as into one of the troops, as to one of the soldiers, then you were considered to be trusted. So the Gemara seems to say that's not so pasha, but let's at least start with a basic framework. We're talking about the soldiers who were in the Chayalos of Beis David. Those are the soldiers who are considered to be miyuchasim, and therefore we trust that they are ksherim, and we don't have to do research on them. Amar Rav Yosef Mikra, how do we know that the Chayalos shel Beis David were so from? The pasuk reads, and it's a little bit of a play on words here because it's not spelled with a samech, but it says V'his yachsam batzava b'milchama. From the word yichus, the sin and the samech are being viewed as interchangeable. So therefore we see that they're interchangeable. Why is it? Therefore we see, I should say, that one who is in the army has yichus. Says the Gemara v'taimamai. Why is it that the Chayalos shel Beis David had to have yichus? Why couldn't anyone enlist? Now in the Israeli army, we have Druzim, we have Israeli Arabs, we have Russians, non-Jews galore. There's plenty of non-Jews. So why is it that in the Chayalos shel Beis David, we wanted everyone to be frum, that we wanted everyone to have yichus? Says the Gemara, Amar Yehuda Amar Rab, Kadesh teis chusan, uschus avosam misayatan. Yeah, that's a stark, beautiful answer. The reason why we want to have people who are miyuchasim, who are fighting in the war, is because they then can lean on the fact that there's suchus avos, something that we often don't think about, but the Gemara shares this in other places, that the tefillah of a tzaddik ben Rasha is not as powerful as the tefillah of the tzaddik ben tzaddik. So by war, we want to make sure as many people as possible are miyuchasim, because that will help the war. Says the Gemara, wait 1 minute, in the Chayalos shel Beis David, there were a few characters who seemingly were not miyuchasim. The Gemara says 7 lines from the bottom of Ayin Vav Amud Beis, V'ika tzelek ha'amoni, seems like he's an Ammonite. So the Gemara says, my lav da'asi me Ammon, wasn't he born there? Isn't he a goy from Ammon and not a miyuchas? The Gemara says, lo, to Yosef Ammon. He happens to live there, but he's not a local. They just called him that because of the city he lived in, but he really was a miyuchas. V'ika Uriah HaChiti, we all know who Uriah HaChiti was. Anyone know? Bathsheba's husband before he was killed in war. Big discussions in the Gemara. Was David chote or was David not chote by putting Uriah on the front lines? And there are shitas lekan ulekan. Anyways, look at Uriah's last name, Hachiti. He's a Hittite. That's not good. Those people we have a din to kill them. So what's going on over here? How can Uriah be considered to be a miyuchas? So the Gemara says, my lav de asi meches. Doesn't it mean that he came from the land of Chiti? No, lo, the Yossi beches only lives there. Okay, but there's another guy, Ba'ika Itai Hagiti. And B'chitema, if you want to say over here, Hachanami Diyasi Begas, if you want to say over here that really he's a miyuchas, but he just lives in a city of Gas, that can't be. Because Amar Rav Nachman Itai Hagiti Ba'u Ubitla, that Itai Hagiti came along and nullified. This is talking about a Gemara in Avodah Zarah, and for the context, we're going to look in Rashi. Rashi's 5 lines from the bottom. Dibur Amaschil v'ha Amar Rav Nachman. He says b'Maseches Avodah Zarah, and on to the first very long line of Rashi at the bottom of the page, 3 lines from the bottom. Ba Itai Agiti Shahaya Oved Kochavim Ubatla LaAvodas Kochavim Shalateres Malkam Vehu Shem Shikutz Amonim. This guy Itai Agiti was definitely a guy. And Rashi says from Maseches Avodah Zarah that this guy was an absolute goy. So that's a kasha on someone who is in the Chayalos shel Beis David. Forget about being a miyuchas. He was a goy d'oraisa. That's one kasha. The Odin, furthermore, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rab, Arba Meos Yeladim Hayu Lo David. There were 400 children that were attributed to David. The Kulam Bnei Yefas Toar Hayu, and they were all children of a Yefas Toar, as we know. under very certain and strict circumstances that we've learned about in the past. A POW who was a female could be taken as a wife. Lo dibra Torah ela keneged yetzer hara. We'll relearn the sugya in about 7 years because we learned it a few months ago. V'chulam mistaprim kumi umegadim bluri sayu. They had their hair cut in a way where the sides were cut down. It's like a mullet type of haircut with a lot of hair in the back. V'chulam yoshvim bekroni shel zav. They were all sitting in chariots of gold. They would go in front of all of the soldiers. These people were major soldiers of Beis David. So this is a double kasha. We have this kasha of Itai Hagiti, and we have these 400 kids who were the children of Bnei Yefas Torah. The Yefas Torah was a shiksa. She wasn't a yid, which means that the kids are going. So forget about they're for sure not miyuchasim. So what was this talking about? It must be, says the Gemara, last 3 words on the page, the azle lebuusei alma. They were only there to scare everyone, but they weren't actually in the chayalos shel Beis David. Rashi at the bottom of the page of Aloha yuyordim mesocham l'chama in Yisrael. In order to be an actual soldier in the chayalos shel Beis David, you needed to be a miyuchas because, as the Gemara mentioned, we wanted to have the zechus avos that applied for people in the battle. So let's say you have a young soldier who's a big tzaddik, and he's a tzaddik ben tzaddik ben tzaddik. You want him fighting. Give the guy a gun. Give him some lessons. Make sure he knows what he's doing so he doesn't shoot himself in the face. And then move on. And then let him shoot because he has zechuyos that are stronger than the bullets. That's what the Gemara says. That's why the chayalos Beis David all had to be miyuchasim. We are now at the top of Ayin Zayin Amar Aleph. No small page and no small task. We're going to be discussing distinctions in halal status. We know that a halal is a child that's born to an illicit relationship with a kohen, but we'll see distinctions between men and women. The first half of this Gemara, the first page of this Gemara is a little bit more complicated, and then on the Amud Beis, it eases up a little bit. On that point, we're going to be stopping about 3/4 of the way down, maybe a little bit less than that. And then tomorrow's shiur is going to be posted and recorded. I won't be available tomorrow night. Teaching some other class that's not Gemara, but I don't have a choice. It's not even Torah, but I still don't have a choice. So we're going to have to record and post for tomorrow. What? I didn't hear you, but I heard you. The Gemara says on the top of Ayin Zayin of an Aleph, a new Mishnah. Bas Chalal Zachar, the daughter of a Chalal, of a man who is a Chalal, that daughter is Psula min HaKahuna La'olam. The daughter of a man who's a Chalal is never allowed to marry, and neither she, and as we'll soon see in the Gemara, nor any female descendants in her chain. Any of her descendants, they're not allowed to marry a Kohen ever. There's a status of Halal, Halala, whatever it is in the female, for all of the women and future descendants. What?
It sounds like a Kiddush to me.
Well, this whole page was a Kiddush to me because I did not know any of it. I mean, I knew some basic things, but it's pretty humbling, you know. Some daf Gemara, you're like, I got this, which is not true, by the way. But then you get to Gemaras and you're like, I don't got this. It's like, oh, so that was the Gemara today. So that's the opening line of the Mishnah, that all of the women, if a woman is born to a male, to a halal, all of the female descendants from her will always be halal, halala, and they are not allowed to marry in to the Kohen group. It seems to be that way from the framing of the Mishnah, but I don't know, like Lamaisa. I don't know. It would be a big problem because as we've been discussing, Nichus is very, very hard to track. It's very easy for one person before the DNA test to have Tashma Shamita and to have a baby that she said really was her husband's, but it really was. It's so easy, not easy, but it's very likely that there are people out there who are Hagam. Absolutely. In a way, Gerus is cleaner because there's nothing to worry about. We know you are a goy. We know that you were probably Mizana. We assume you were, but once you convert, so all of that is erased, and then you start over. It's not pasha. It's not pasha. But that's what the Gemara said many blot ago. If you remember that some of the Amoraim were like raced out of town so that they wouldn't say what they knew about the communities, because then everyone would end up getting divorced because there was a whole city that was Avadim. They didn't know they were Avadim. One of the Amoraim knew they were Avadim. It's a big problem. So we have halachic pathways in order to make sure that we can stay married to our spouses, even though there's small elements of suffix as to whether or not they're ksherim, that they're miyuchasim, not pasha. That's din number one, that the daughter of a halal will always be psula. Okay, a regular Yisrael, shanasa halala. Let's say that the man is not a halal, but the woman is a halala. So you have a woman who's a halala. Bito kshera lekahuna. Distinction. When it's a man who is the halal, then all female descendants will always be halala. But when it's a halala, and she became a halala by having an inappropriate relationship, as we'll soon discuss, then all of her descendants, all of her daughters, will be ksheira lekahuna. It's only when it starts with a male is it problematic. When it starts with a female, then she's the only one who cannot marry a kohen. That's it. Her next generation is ksheira lekahuna. And then the Gemara repeats a din, seemingly the same thing as the first line. Halal shenasa bas Yisrael bito psula lekahuna. The Gemara is going to ask why we're saying this. Even that answer I don't understand, but we'll get there when we get there. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he says, I want to extend this din of halal to a broader area of halacha. He says, bas ger zachar kebas halal zachar. The daughter of a ger who's male has the same status of the daughter of a halal zachar in that all of the daughters are psula lekahuna. That means, seemingly according to the Tanakama, that the daughter of a ger cannot marry a kohen. That's what it looks like from this Gemara. Let me say that again to make sure it's right. Yeah, the daughter of a male ger. So if a man converts and gets married and has a baby, so his daughter is not allowed to marry into the Kohen world. She cannot marry a Kohen. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Yisrael shenasa giores. Let's say the man wasn't the ger. Let's say that the man was a regular yid, one not like me. I'm a regular yid. I grew up in a Jewish home for many generations. So Yisrael shenasa giores. If I married a giores, bito ksheira lekehuna, then even though my wife would be in this theoretical construct of giores, our daughter could still marry a kohen. So this is the Gemara is trying to make a comparison between the world of halal and ger. That's what the Gemara says. The ger shenasa bas Yisrael, and a man who marries a bas Yisrael, a man who's a ger, bito ksheira lekahuna. That this is Rabbi Eliezer differentiates and argues against Rabbi Yehuda. He holds that a ger who marries a Yisrael, his daughter is ksheira lekahuna. So machlokes tanoim, if a male ger's daughter can marry a kohen, machlokes tanoim. Good data to have at the table, not good data to bring up halacha l'maisa. You should be quiet because you probably, and I for sure, don't know how to paskin in these cases. I don't know. Is it mutav shiu shogigin ve'alti mazidin? Better to just shut your mouth and let things carry on. Not simple. Let's continue. First of the very long lines on Ayin Zayin, continuing in a difficult Mishnah. Aval. Rabbi Eliezer continues and says, Ger shenasa giores, if you have both ger and giores, both of them were goyim, and they both converted in an appropriate rabbinical court, bito psula lekehuna for sure. That nobody seems to argue. I did a bris for a family like this in Sallisaw, Oklahoma. Both the husband and the wife were goyim d'oraisa. They both converted here through the CRC. I went down to Sallisaw. They're the only Jewish family there. The neighbors were, from their language, a bunch of anti-Semites. Used to take crazy glue and squeeze it into the keyhole of their tractors. Like real, oile Russia, oile Shchenu. They were the only Yidden who were there. They were both Gerim. Their daughters cannot marry Kohanim. Their daughters cannot marry Kohanim because both parents, that's according to everybody. Seemingly, again, Pashas of Mishnah. Echad ger, the echad avadim mishuchrarim, and also extending the din still more. Whether or not we're talking about a ger, or an eved mishuchrar, afilu ad yud doros, ad shetehei imam Yisrael, we have to wait 10 generations, even if they're no longer in that role, provided that the aim is a Yisrael, and that's when things will change over. We'll analyze this line in the Gemara, not today, but down the road, because again, a little bit cryptic. Lastly, for our Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi Omer, af ger shenasa giores, bito ksheira lekehuna, dissenting opinion. Even if both the couple and Sallisaw, they're both goyim who became gerim, their daughter is allowed to marry a kohen. Basically, every shita under the sun exists in this Mishnah. This is why we need to learn with Rishonim, why we need to learn with Shulchan Aruch, Shachs and Tazes, why we need Rabbanim, we need Igros Moshe, and all the Shilas and Shuvas to get through all of these cases. Super, super, super complicated. And I believe most of us can't paskin these shilas and should not even touch them with a 10-foot pole. These are powder kegs. They're very dangerous to talk about at the table because there are gerim in our community who would be deeply insulted by a hint of something that might be off. Even if it might be halacha l'maisa, so you should still be careful to talk about. The Gemara asks on something that we learned in the first line of our Mishnah. The Mishnah on the top line, it said that the daughter of a man who's a halal was psula mina kahuna la'olam. So the Gemara says, my la'olam. Why did you add the word la'olam? We could have learned the same halacha without. The Gemara says, mahu detema, I might have thought, midi dehave amitri ve'adomi, that perhaps the limitations that we have by a halal are similar to that to a mitzri or an adomi. Malahalan, just like by a mitzri and an adomi, la'achar shalosh doros, things change. Afkan, perhaps in our case of a halal, nami la'achar shlosha doros, things change. Kamash malan, that they don't. The female descendants of a male halal will forever be a halala. She could never marry into a Kohen, according to the Tanakh. 2 dots, 8 lines down, 9 lines down. Yisrael shenasa halala, that's the second din of our Mishnah. We said that if a regular Yisrael man marries a halala, that her daughters are allowed to marry into the Kohen family. Says the Gemara, how do we know this to be true? Amar Rav Yochanan Mishum Reb Shimon, we have a Gzera Shava. Ne'emar kan v'lo yechalel zaro be'amav. That's one pasuk, that we cannot make a halal of the zaro with his nation. V'ne'emar lahalan lo yitama ba'al be'amav. By the world of Tuma, we also have the language of be'amav. So we make a bridge. What's our Gzera Shava? Malahalan scharim, just but like by Tuma, only men who are Kohanim have a restriction of Tuma, women don't. So then, and velona kevos, Afkan, perhaps over here we can make the extension and say that when it comes to halal, the din of a halal, making all of his female descendants into halala, is only a din by men and not a din by women. That's how the Gemara distinguishes based on this. So we see that we follow the paternal line to determine if the daughters will be halala. So it says the Gemara Elamayata, if it's true that we're following the paternal line, then maybe the following should be true. Bito shal Kohen Gadol, who marries an almana, tishteri. Kohen Gadol is a kosher. He marries an almana who's a psul for him. Who's the kosher one? He's the kosher one. She's the pasul one. But you just said by a halal that we follow patrilineal descent, and if the father is a halal, then all the daughters are going to be problematic. So why don't we follow patrilineal descent over here? The father's a kosher. He did a maisa shel iser. The Kohen Gadol cannot sleep with an almana or marry an almana. Maybe we should follow that too and say that the daughter in this case should be tishteri and that she shouldn't be a problem. Says the Gemara, that's not correct because of the pasuk. We're a quarter of the way down at the end of the line. Ayin zayin amad aleph miksiv beno. No, zaro ksiv. It applies to both. A Kohen Gadol who marries an almana, all of their children are going to be problematic. And what's the drush over here? Lo yechalel zaro be'amav. That's what the pasuk means. So it says the Gemara, fine, but maybe bas beno tishteri, maybe that the din of a halal having a multi-generational impact is only by a halal. And perhaps we should say that by a Kohen Gadol who marries an almana, that the granddaughter, that the son's daughter should be allowed to marry back into the Kohen family. Says the Gemara, no. Ksiv, the pasuk says, lo yechalel zaro. What is this hekesh? Makish zaro lo. Mahu Bito psula, just like the Kohen Gadol, his daughter is apostle. Af beno, so too the Kohen Gadol's son, Bito psula. So seemingly the case would be that it would always be true for a Kohen as well. If a Kohen marries an almana, all of his female descendants will also be problematic, even though it's the opposite of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said when the man is a halal, all the female descendants are going to be halala. Over here by the almana and the Kohen Gadol, there we also have a similar idea that all of their next generations will be following the mother, which is the opposite of what our Mishnah said, but all of them are going to be halalos. That's what the Gemara seems to say. Asks the Gemara a third of the way down, bas bito tissar, that perhaps the granddaughter should be asr. Let's take a look at Rashi to see what this is talking about. Rashi says halfway down, Dibra Maschil, bas bito chalala. The daughter of his daughter, who is a halala, tissar mehachakesha. Perhaps the hekesh shouldn't only be through the son of the Kohen, but even through the daughter of the Kohen. The Gemara says no. Im kain, if we were to do that, you would undercut and undermine the effectiveness of the Gzera Shava. Im kain Gzera Shava mai ahanile. The Gzera Shava would be useless, and that cannot be. Therefore, even though the question is logically good, but the source we know is a valid source because the Gzera Shava, according to many, can only be learned from a Rebbe all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu, and therefore the Gzera Shava has to stand, and therefore the question falls apart. That brings us to the 2 dots, and now this is the third line of the Mishnah that we're analyzing. The third line of the Mishnah reads here between the 2 dots, Chalal Shanasa Bas Yisrael Bito Psula. This was the same as the first in. Hatanale Resha, Bas Chalal Zachar Psula Mina Kahuna La'olam. We already learned about this. So why is it that we're repeating ourselves? So it says the Gemara, Aidi detana Resha, because we learned about this in the Resha. What did we learn in the first case of the Resha? That Yisrael shenasa chalala, that language is Yisrael shenasa chalala. We wanted to have the inverse of that language. Equals and opposites are great for memorization. Therefore, Tani Nami Seifa, Tana Nami Seifa, Chalal shenasa bas Yisrael. The Gemara says, Masnis and Deloker Abdustai ben Yehuda. Perhaps our Mishnah is not like the Shita of Rav Dustoi ben Yehuda. What is different between Rav Dustoi ben Yehuda and our Mishnah? The Gemara says, Ditanya. Rav Dustoi ben Yehuda Omer, Keshem shebnei Yisrael mikva tara lechalalos. Just like men are able to marry chalalos, kach manos Yisrael mikva latar chalalim. Seems to be that he has no problem at all with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah he doesn't agree with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah seems to say, black on white, that the female descendants of a male halal are problematic. He says no problem at all. My time of the Rab Dustay Rabbi Yehuda. Why is it the Rab Dustay Rabbi Yehuda doesn't say like our Mishnah? Because Amar Kra, the pasuk says we're halfway down. Lo yechalel zaro be'amav be'am echad hu demechal. When does a child become a halal? Only when both parents are the same. If both parents are halalim or both are psulim, then the daughter becomes a halala. But if you only have one of each, a kosher and a pasul, the daughter cannot become a halal. And what was our case in our Mishnah? Top line of the page. Bas halal zachar, who married a regular Yisraelis. That daughter is a halal forever. So therefore, it must be that Rav Dustoi, Rabbi Yehuda holds that when both parents are both halalim, that's when their daughter becomes a halala. But bishnei amimim, if they're two different kinds of Jews, one a kosher and one a pasil, eino mechal. So it seems from here that we actually have an even added opinion to our Mishnah. We thought we had all the opinions in our Mishnah. We didn't. Now we added another one. And we go across the boards over here from who can be a halal and who cannot. Do we follow only the maternal line? Do we follow only the paternal line? Do I need one parent to be a halal? Only the father or both parents according to Rav Dustay review? So there's a variety of shitas, and this page alone would require weeks of research to get clear, as do most dapim in Shas. But this particular one has so many shitas, and we need to understand the underpinnings of each of them to get it clear.
Does that have an effect on whether the child will leave a pigeon on them? Is it partly because is a bas Kohen, or the father was a Kohen?
Well, if either of them would be a Kohen or a Levi, it would ruin. My wife's a bas Levi, no pidyon aben.
Right, but she's not a halal.
No, you're asking is a halala stripped away of kahuna to the point that there would be a mitzvah pidyon aben?
Right.
No idea. I don't know. I could guess, but I don't know. My guess would have no teeth to it. Good question. Halfway down, the Gemara says in the middle of the page of Brisa, Tanu Rabbanan, the pasuk says Lo yechalel zaro. So you should not make your children into chalalim. Ainli elazaro, he atzma minayin. She herself, and Rashi points out that when a Kohen Gadol marries an almana, that's our case. When a Kohen Gadol marries an almana, I understand that the child is problematic. That's what we just learned. But what about the woman herself? If a Kohen Gadol marries an almana, does she become a halala? Or she did something usher and only her child is a halala? The Gemara says, Amris kal v'chomer. There's a kal v'chomer to answer this question. Mazaro, the child, shelo avar avera mischalel, the child of this intimacy, of this relationship. So you have a Kohen Gadol and an almana who has a child. The child became a halal. What did he do wrong? Absolutely nothing. Says the Gemara, yeah. So if the zera became a halal without any avera, then he, the almana, she'avra avera, eino din shemischaleles. Shouldn't it be obvious that if this woman slept with the Kohen Gadol and had a baby with him, and the child did nothing wrong and became a halal, the wife who did something wrong, she should for sure be a halala. That's the Gemara's kal v'chomer. The Gemara says, not so fast. What about the Kohen Gadol? Who else mo yuchiach? The Kohen Gadol will disprove this thought because she'avar avera ve'ein mischalal. The Kohen Gadol didn't become a halal because he slept and had a baby with this almana. That's a great argument. The Gemara says, well, there's something unique about a Kohen. about the Kohen Gadol, which is that he cannot become a halal. Says the Gemara, no, you can't argue that because malahusha kain ein mischalel b'chol makom. There is no precedence in halacha for a Kohen Gadol ever becoming a halal. Tomar behi, but in regards to the almana, shemischaleles b'chol makom, she can become a halala in a variety of different ways. Kohen Gadol cannot become a halal. So says the Gemara, v'im nafshe chalomar, and even if you don't like this argument, and we'll see what this means in a moment, what other argument the Gemara was thinking, but v'im nafshe chalomar, if you want to say that you don't like this argument, Amar Kra, still I have a pasuk that teaches you that the woman will still become a halala, lo yechalel zaro, lo yechulal. Who are we talking about? Zeh shahaya kosher v'nischalel. We're not talking about the child. The child was never kosher. We're talking about a woman who was kosher before she got pregnant from the Kohen Gadol. That's who we're talking about, who's v'nischalel. So now we have a text proof in addition to the Kal V'chomer, in order to indicate that the wife of the almana wife of the Kohen Gadol, she becomes a halala. Says the Gemara, what did the Gemara mean when it said that we needed to also consider a pasuk? My im nafshe chalomar. What were you saying that maybe I would still be concerned about the shita, that maybe the Kal V'chomer wasn't good? Says the Gemara, because v'chitema, I might have argued ikal nifrach malazaro sheken yitziraso be'avera. Maybe by a child who was born from scratch as a halal, but then Omar Kra lo yechalel. Maybe over there we say that there's a chilul lo yechulal. That's why we need the pasuk to say zeh shahaya kosher v'nischalel. There's a difference. You might have thought the Kal V'chomer to say that just like the baby became a halal, so too the mother. But there's a discrepancy between the baby and the mother. The baby was never kosher. The baby was born as a fetus. When he was born, first second, he was a halal. The woman lived her whole life as a ksher and became a halal. You might have thought that that's an unlevel playing field. And if you don't like the Kal V'chomer, don't worry. I still have a pasuk to bring a raya for you. That's what the Gemara says over here in order to teach us that the wife, the almana, who has a baby with the Kohen Gadol, she becomes a halala in the process. Tanu Rabbanan, Ezo hi halala. How do we define a woman who is a halala? The Gemara gives a cryptic answer that will get destroyed. Kol shenolda min psulin. Any woman who's born from psulim, says the Gemara, my psulim. What type of psul are we talking about that's going to create a halala? Ilema psulim lo. If you want to say just that she is puzzled to the man, well, that's not true, because in a different case, a case of hayamachzer grushaso, let's say that a man divorces his wife and remarries her. In the interim, she married another man. So Rachel and Reuven were married. Rachel and Reuven gets divorced. Rachel marries Shimon and gets divorced. Now Reuven wants to marry Rachel again. That's aser. There, de psula lo. Rachel's not allowed to marry Reuven again because she was married to another man in between. What's the din? She's psula lo, but uvaneha ksherim. So you can't tell me that the definition of a halala is a woman who's psula to the man. Because in the case of machzir grushaso, we see that she's psula, but the children are not halala. So that can't be the case of halala. So the Gemara therefore proves this case. Tichsiv to'evahi. He to'eva ve'in baneha to'avim. So that doesn't work. So then Amar Rav Yehuda hachi kamar. Ezo hi halala. Let's try version number 2 of how to understand a halala. Says the Gemara, kol shen ezo hi halala, kol shen nolda min pasal lekahuna. Anyone who's born of a woman who's psula to the kahuna. Nolda in, lo nolda lo, is this dependent on having a child? Hecha tesi that it's dependent on having a child. Hare almana ugrusha zona de lo nolda. You have a case of an almana, they're usher to one another. A grusha, she's usher to a kohen. A zona, a woman who slept with another man, she's asura. Even de lo nolda, v'kahavya chalala. So it can't be about nolda. It's not about having the child. The intimacy, the intercourse generates the psul itself. So that can't be the definition of a halal if you're saying it's based on leida, on having children. So Amar Rabba, hachi kamar, you're right. Ezo halala muskeres shelo hayala shasa kosher klal. What type of halala are we talking about where there's never been a moment of kosher for this person? Says the Gemara, 8 lines or so from the bottom, kol shenolda min psulakuna. We're talking about a child born from birth as a halala. She never had a moment of hechsher. She was already in utero. The second she was born into the world and breathed her first breath, she was a halala. Done. My muskeres. What was the strange language that Rabbah used one line ago and said, Ezo chalala muskeres? Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yitzchak Baravin Hachi Kamar. Ezo hi chalala she'ikra midivrei Torah, where it's very clear from the Torah that this is the case. And we don't even need, Ein tzrichin lefarish midivrei sofrim, that's kol shenolda, min psule kahuna. Anyone who is born to this, let's just take the classic example that we started with today of a male chalal who has a baby with a regular Israelis. That child who's born, the girl who's born is 100% chalala from birth, no questions asked. That is your prototype, your archetype of being a chalal. Now for the easier parts of today. 6-7 lines from the bottom. Tanu Rabbana. Almana, almana, almana. Let's say that a man is involved with 3 almanas. We don't yet know what the Metzias is of this case. We'll analyze shortly. Eino chayev ela achas. If he's with these 3 people or women with 3 scenarios, we'll see there's only one isser there. And grusha, grusha, grusha. If he's with, again, either one woman with 3 ex-husbands or 3 women who are grushas, then eino chayev ela achas. It's also only one isser. And as well, if a man is with an almana, ugrusha, she's also a divorced woman, and she's v'chalala, and she's a zona. All 4 of them. Says the Gemara, if bisman shehem kiseder, if her almanas, if her isurim stacked on one another, first her husband died, then she got married and got divorced, then she slept with the Kohen Gadol and became a chalala, then she became a zona. If it was done kiseder, only in this specific order, chayiv al kol achas ve'achas. But zinsa v'nis chalala, let's say she had znus first and chilul after, and then v'nis garsha v'nis armala, eno chayiv al achas. Even though all 4 of these isurim are different, the Gemara is going to discuss this very odd presentation of the Gemara, of the Brisa. Let's analyze. Omar Mar. The case of almana, 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 eno chayiv al achas, what was going on over there? Hi almana heichidami. When we said that she was a triple almana, what were the details? Ile mashaba al almanas Ruvain, the al almanas Shimon, the al almanas Levi. If a man cohabited with 3 different divorced women, a woman who was divorced from Ruvain and then separately from Shimon, so then amai eno chayev ela achas. Why then would he only be chayev for sleeping with that woman, those women 3 times? Hare gufan muchlakin. They're not even the same people. Top of Ayin Zayin and Base. They're not even the same person. And Hare Shemos Muchlakin. He didn't even sleep with the same woman. They're 3 separate divorced women. Pashat that he's going to be chayev al kolachas ve'achas. Ela, it must be sheba al almana achas shalosh bios. Perhaps the case is where he slept with Rachel, who was divorced from Ruvain and Shimon and Levi, one woman. She's a serial divorcer. She can't handle any of her marriages. Says the Gemara, well, wait 1 second. Hey, chidami. What were the details of the episodes of him sleeping with this woman? Idilo asrube. If no one gave him a fair warning, a hasra, between the 3 moments of intimacy with Rachel, who's the serial divorcer, then pshita de eno chayev ela achas, because he didn't know. It's all bechad behelam achas. He only knew what he knew. He slept with her. Okay, he should have slept with her, but he didn't know that they were separate isurim. There was no hasra. So therefore, if there was hasra, then we know that it's eno chayev ela achas. And if you want to say on the 4th line, ela de asrube kol chada v'chada, and if every time he was about to be intimate with this woman, they said she's also divorced from Shimon, and then he goes and sleeps with her. And then the next episode, she's also divorced from Levi. So then in that case, amai eno chayev ela achas. If he got hasra, he should be chayev 3 times over. After all, v'hatnan. Nazir shahayashose yayin kol hayom kulo. We learned this case in Maseches Nazir. He's a lush. He's got the camel pack filled with wine, total alcoholic, and he's a Nazir. Terrible combination. He's sitting there pounding. Eno chayev ela achas. 1 isser of eating grapes, grape product. Says the Gemara, if, quoting this Mishnah from Nazir, if Amrulo al tishte, if every time he makes a borei pri hagafen, they say, stop, you're a Nazir, you're not allowed to drink, and then v'hu shos, and he drinks, chayev al kol achas ve'achas. So we see precedents that when there's fair warning between the individual isurim, it's not helam achas, you're chayev al kol achas ve'achas. So back to our case, if we have warnings, you're chayev 3 times over. And if you have no warnings, you're chayev once. So therefore, what is our case of almana lo tzricha? It must be shabal almanas Reuven, shahayasa almanas Shimon, shahayasa almanas Levi. we're talking about one woman who had 3 husbands. Ma'udetema hareshemos muchlakim kamash malan gufim muchlakim ba'inan vileka. Rachel was married to Shimon and she got divorced. Rachel was married to Reuven and got divorced. Rachel was married to Levi and they got divorced. Now on the document, those marriages look different. Rachel to husband 1, Rachel to husband 2, Rachel to husband 3. But we don't just need Rachel to be, we need it to be Gufim Muchlakim also, that she's also different. That was the Havamina. I might have thought that Rachel, who was married to 3 different men and now divorced from all 3 of them, that they're considered to be 3 different Kamash Malan, that's only one Isser. She's one woman and that's not Gufim Muchlakim. That was the Chiddush of the case of Almana, Almana, Almana. And 10, 11 lines down on Ayin Zayin Amid Beis, the Gemara says, what about the case of Almana Ugrusha V'chalala Zona? Hi Tana, Maika Savar, what is this weird shita that only if a woman first became an Almana and then became a Grusha and then became a Chalala and then became a Zona, would she only be chayiv in that case? Says the Gemara, Ika Savar Isser Chalal Isser, if you say that Isurim are stackable, that when you do one Maisa, you can violate multiple Isurim, Almana, Grusha, Chalal, Zona, 4 Isurim at one time. If you say that Isser is Chalal Isser, so then, Ikasavar Isser Chalal Isser, then Ipchamai. Then who cares if the list is reversed? Our Mishnah said that it's only Kiseder Hadvarim. But if you say Isser is Chalal Isser, who cares in what order she became something? Doesn't matter. If Isser is Chalal Isser, then Isser is Chalal Isser. And because of and if you say that Isurim are not stackable, and you can only violate one Isur at a time, so then afilu keseder azen namilo. Even if it's spitz, you did it perfectly. First she was an almana, and then then it doesn't matter. It's ein Isur chalal Isur. It's only one Isur. You can't. It's just the first Isur of almana. Whatever happens first. So Amar Rava. Here's what's going on in our brisa. The brisa that we learned at the bottom of Ayin Zayin Amid Aleph. Amar Rava Haitana Isser Chalal Isser Lesle. Please listen. This is very subtle. There is no Isser Chalal Isser. According to our Mishnah, there's no such thing as stackable Isurim. There is not. You can't sleep with this one woman who has 4 statuses of Isser on her and get those 4 different Isurim. But instead, what does our Tana hold of Isser Mosif Islay? So it's not Isser 1, Isser 2, Isser 3, Isser 4. It's Isser 1 that is now more and more and more and more Usser. It's one Isser that gets more swollen in time because you're not stacking different Isurim, but you're compounding the one Isser that you have. That's Isser Mosif Islay. So let's go through it. Almana starts out as a Surah L'Kohen Gadol V'Sharya L'Kohen Hedjot. And then Havyale Grusha, which is Migudi Tosaf La Yisur Lagabe Kohen Hedjot. Now we're adding, because we didn't have the Grusha before, and because it's Usr by a regular Kohen, now that we have the actual Isser of the Almana, we're adding to the Kohen Gadol's Isser of Grusha. And then ve'adayin shari lemechal b'truma. At this point, it's still permissible for her to eat truma. So havyala chalala. When she becomes a chalala by doing something even worse, she became a grusha. She's a grusha married to a kohen gadol. Now migu de itosaf isur lemechal b'truma. Itosaf isur legabe kohen gadol. We're not, again, it's not isur chalal isur, but it's compounding that first isur with more facets. It's making it more a bigger isur. Says the Gemara, Zona, my Isser Mosif Ispa. What extra layer of Zona is there? He's already got all of these different Isurim in place. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Chana Bar Rav Katina, Ho V'Shem Znus Posel B'Yisrael. And Rashi, a third of the way down, says over here, Kigon She'im Zinsa Tachtav Ne'eseres Al Baila. There's an Isser to the Baal. Therefore, over there, we have our 4 layers. And therefore, Isser Mosif is in a very specific order, because had it been out of order, it wouldn't have been Mosif to the previous thing. It needs to be Keseder Hadvarim, not because of Isser Chalal Isser. This Tana might hold that there is no Isser Chalal Isser, but there is Isser Mosif. And Isser Mosif requires a very specific organized formula of adding facets of Isser to the first Isser. So it started out with the Isser of Almana, then we added the Isser of Grusha, then we added the Isser of Chalala, then we added the Isser of Zona. That's what the Gemara says. We're halfway down, and the last of the very short lines. We're going to learn about 10 more lines and then stop. Sorry for all these longer shiurim, they're just longer blot. I'm not Rabbi Resnick, I don't know how he does it. Says the Gemara, Tani Tana Kamid. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, but they're great stories. It's also, that was a great line. That was, the guns are out. That was a great line. Okay, Tani Tana Kamid Rav Sheshes. There was a Tana who brought a brisa, or I should say, a brisa was brought in front of Rav Sheshes. The Tana didn't talk to Rav Sheshes. They didn't overlap. But a brisa was brought in front of Rav Sheshes. Kol shehu b'yikach, anyone who is marriageable to a kohen, harehu below yikach, that then can trigger the isser of lo yikach if that person's an almana. Kol she'eno b'yikach, anyone who's not marriageable to a kohen, eno below yikach, then there should be no concern about lo yikach making that person a chalala, with one exception. Prat lekohen a kohen gadol sheba al achoso almana. This is an extremely odd scenario. A kohen gadol sleeps with his sister, who's an almana. Okay, so the kohen gadol, let's say his name is Chaim. He has a sister whose name is Chana. Chana was married to Ruvain, and Ruvain died. The kohen gadol then sleeps with his sister Chana, who's not only his sister but is also an almana. This is not a very good idea, but that's what happened. The Gemara says, Amar lei do Amar lach mani. Who would the author of this brisa be? It must be Reb Shimon he do Amar ein iser chal al iser, because he says the brisa says it's prat lekohen gadol, where we see that there is no stacking of isurim. It's only the iser of achoso for the kohen gadol, but not the iser of almana. That must be ein iser chal al iser. What is the classical example of ein iser chal al iser? It is this. Titania, 3 lines into the wide lines. Reb Shimon Omer, ha'ochel nevela b'yom kippurim. He is pater from the kares of Yom Kippur. So let's say that you're starving. Let's say that you need to eat food, life and death. You walk out of Makor, you go around the corner, you go through the drive-through at McDonald's or Burger King, whatever. What is it? It's McDonald's, and you eat nevela. So the din is that you're chayiv on nevela, but you're not chayiv kares. Why? Ein iser chal al iser. That's shitas Reb Shimon. And de'i Rabbanon, had it been not like Reb Shimon, but like Rabbanon who held of iser chal al iser, so then ha'amre iser chal al iser, then the sister, the Kohen would have been chayiv on 2 things, on achoso and on almana, but that's not what the brisa said. Elamai, it must be that the brisa is only shitas Reb Shimon. Says the Gemara, not necessarily true. 5 lines into the wide lines. Afilu tema Rabbanon. It could even be that the brisa that was taught in front of Rav Sheshes is like the Rabbanon. Ki amre Rabbanon iser chal al iser. When do we say, according to the Rabbanon, that we stack Yisurim, that Isser is Chal al Isser? That's only in certain cases. Hani mili Isser Chamor al Isser Kal. That's when a more Chamor Isser is being added to a less Chamor Isser. Aval, in our case, where the Isser Kal of Almana is being added al Isser Chamor of Achoso Lo Chayil, then he would agree that it's a case of Ein Isser Chal al Isser, and therefore this brisa that was brought to Rav Sheshes could be understood both according to Reb Shimon and according to the Rabbanon. Ika de Amre, some say that the analysis of this brisa was a little bit different. Says the Gemara 6 lines into the wide lines on Ayin Zayin Amud Beis, Hamani, and maybe our brisa is Rabbanon he. De Amre Isser Chal al Isser, V'chi Amre Rabbanon Isser Chal al Isser, Hanimili Isser Chamor al Isser Kal. But in our case, Aval Isser Kal al Isser Chamor Lo Chayil. Perhaps our brisa is talking about where the Isser Kal of Almana, of a Kohen Gadol, is added only after the Isser of Achoso, which is an Isser Chamor. So he would say, Ein Isser Chal al Isser. And to Reb Shimon, perhaps Reb Shimon would not have said this way. Perhaps the Reb Shimon hashta Isser Chamor al Isser Kal Lo Chayil, Isser Kal al Isser Chamor Mibaya. Perhaps Reb Shimon wouldn't have fit with our Mishnah. So the Gemara says, no, it even could have been Reb Shimon. Ma'udatema, I might have thought that Isser Kahuna is shiny, and therefore Reb Shimon would say a little bit different. He would say that there is Ein Isser Chal al Isser, Kamash Malan, that that's not what he would say over here. So therefore, our Mishnah could be understood both by Reb Shimon and by the Shita of the Rabbanon. And here we learned about a beautiful distinction between Isser Chal al Isser and Isser Mosif. Isser Chal al Isser is where we stack Isurim, and Isser Mosif is where we take one Isser and compound it with facets of other Isurim. We'll stop right here. Tomorrow's shiur will be recorded and posted. Wishing you all a beautiful night.